Hi, I'm Justine.
And I'm Sarah Levon.
And we are so glad you're here.
We believe that your life has the potential to make a deep, meaningful impact on the world around you. You, as a nurse, have the ability to add value to every single person and patient you touch.
We want to inspire you with resources, education, and stories to support you to live your absolute best life, both in and outside of work.
But don't expect perfection over here. We're just here to have some conversations about anything birth, work, and life, trying to add some happy to your hour as we all grow together.
By nurses, for nurses, this is Happy Hour with Bundle Birth Nurses. We have a data update. Do you say data or data?
I say data.
Data. I think I say data, and I think I said data because I know you say data.
Oh, I have so much influence on you.
You do. So we have a data update to bring to you. This is hot off the press, and you'll probably hear from it. It was published in JAMA, what is JAMA?
JAMA is the Journal of American Medical Association.
Perfect. That's
like a really big deal.
Big deal. We should know it, guys. JAMA. We know it now. So on July 12th, 2022. So the title of the article is Rate of First-Time Cesarean Deliveries on the Rise in the U.S.
This hurt my heart to see. I was really hoping.
So basically, we think that we should all know about this because, one, you're going to probably hear about it come down the pipeline of information. Two, we want to keep you in the know. We want to talk about why this is happening or why could this be happening, and then what do we do about it, especially as labor and delivery nurses? What do we do about it? So the numbers are, we know that cesareans have been rising greatly. Like it rose 60% from 1996 to 2009, from 20.7% to 32.9%, which is crazy, 60% increase.
That's a lot.
And then it declined a little bit. By 2019, it was 31.7%, which was like, okay, we're doing something. Something's happening. You know, we were excited about that.
And there was a push, right?
For sure.
There came that push. It was
6
like
is the new
CMPCC.
4.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm. Everyone was pushing it. Yeah, for sure.
NTSB task forces.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm. And then it increased again to 31.8%. So not much.
This is
in 2020. So it went from 31.7% in 2019 to 31.8% in 2020. So like barely, basically. And then 32.1% in 2021. So we're going up. We're continuing to rise. We are almost to the highest we've been, which was 2009. So 32.9% was in 2009. We're now at 32.1% in 2021, which actually sucks to think about. Like, we've been trying.
Yeah.
You know?
Or it feels like we've been trying.
Yeah. And like, think about all those task force and all that, those resources, especially hospitals that really, really, really have been pushing. Mm-hmm. And
well, the question that I asked immediately was, well, what happened between 2019 and 2020? Was it 21? Mm-hmm. 21. And it was the pandemic.
For sure.
Like a huge, massive, world stressing, healthcare stressing. I feel like I don't have enough words to express the challenge of the pandemic.
Yep.
So what we know right now is that the data that we have on C-sections since the pandemic is that they have risen, which was not only disappointing to me, but also really shocking. Mm-hmm. I feel like we've done so much work in this area, and like nurses are really trying harder. They have more tools. And mind you, I also think of like how many people have been through physiologic birth and the limitations on trainings throughout the pandemic. And then, you know, so I'm like, oh yeah, we tried to help that, but also like there's no fighting the stress of the pandemic.
I think too, you mentioned before we recorded this episode, like how the hospitals blocked out doulas.
Oh yeah.
You know, that's huge. I didn't even think about that when I first read it, but of course, like.
Well, my first thought was, like, physiologically, what does stress do on the body, right? We know this from our physiologic birth class, that stress, aka adrenaline, and catecholamines, that they actually counteract our labor hormones. So the best thing we can do intervention-wise is decrease the stress in the room. Can we decrease the stress of a pandemic? No. I mean, I think about even the shift in my clients, the amount of anxiety and panic and new concerns. Labor is stressful on its own, but then you layer the pandemic on it. I think this to me is a perfect again, we're making entire hypotheses here, guys, but like mostly to like facilitate a conversation so that you can be thinking about it too and piecing them together. And so what we know physiologically to piece them logically together is that stress actually affects labor. And I think this to me is like proof that stress affects labor. Now, there are things we can do about that, and I think we can't remove a pandemic, but can we mitigate in other ways? Yes, that's the entire physiologic birth class, let's be honest, in many, many ways. I think one of the first thought I had was we locked out doulas, we locked out support. So I know as much as like we can have that doula conversation, because I would love to have that, because I have lots of opinions on that side of things. But as much as you love or hate doulas, that we know the evidence is extremely clear that the presence of continuous labor support by a doula betters outcomes. I'm going to say
ACOG even recommends it.
Oh, everybody recommends it. That everybody should have continuous labor support. And they actually say that nurses can't provide the same support. They don't provide the same support. While that would be lovely for us to fix it through us being present there one-on-one, it's not the same. And so with that, we know that that's one of the cheapest, least risky interventions to help improve cesarean rates. And what did we do? They were kicked out, they were let in. They were kicked out, they were let in. Myself included. I went through the whiplash of that and turning virtual. And then, oh, you can't have her on FaceTime because it's like recording. I'm like, I'm not recording. And first of all, even if I could, you're not getting audio from it. And that's probably what matters. So, I mean, that to me was my first thought on this of like, to me, this shows the importance of that labor support side if they had a doula. Now, the other side of that is not everybody has a doula. Not everybody would have had a doula. But what happens when we're concerned about COVID, we're concerned about being present with other people, is our nursing care becomes less supportive and less present for our patients. So once again, we're in and out really quickly. We're clustering care like we had talked about before this episode. And that removes that layer of support and even education, even shared decision making. And then to me, once again, when you remove that layer of support and then you think about the fear-based decision making. I mentioned this in a previous episode that like my goal for anybody that I work with is that they are making decisions out of education, not fear. And if they make the same decision, then great, whatever. I don't care what the heck you do. But are these fear-based decisions? And I wonder if in the pandemic, because we also just didn't know,
right,
that decisions are being quicker made towards things. Maybe patients aren't giving as much pushback to the C-section because, well, I just want to get out of the hospital.
For sure. I was even
or even
thinking,
repeats.
Yeah.
I don't want to be in the hospital where that's where COVID is. I had those conversations a lot with clients.
Yeah, I was thinking the COVID patients were like, as a nurse, like I do not want to be in that room long. I have sweat coming from every orifice of my body, right? So I'm trying to get out of those rooms quickly, sadly. I'll admit that. And then on the second hand of the patients that just didn't want to be in the hospital, and like as soon as they got there, they were like, ooh.
Get
like,
me out of here. It's taking too long.
Right, it's taking too long. And, they have all these dreams. They dreamt, like, imagine you. How many people do you feel like you want in your labor room?
The world.
Right. We will all be there virtually.
Film crew. I will live stream that-ish.
So
not
people
really.
have
not my vagina, but like maybe parts of it.
And people dream of this day. And so you dreamt of your mom being there and your sister being there, and now they can't, and that sucks. And so, yeah, I think.
Well, the loss of just like life on top of like, I mean, my sister was pregnant in the pandemic and I lived that with her of like, no one ever saw my belly.
Yeah.
Like, or I never even went shopping for maternity clothes or I never did we did a maternity photo shoot where I took photos, but again, these are like very privileged things, but still like you want to have a baby shower and like, it's just layers upon layers of disappointment. And then that turning into how hard are you going to try? Well, I've already said to it all. And now I'm just bummed about the whole thing.
I'm thinking about a patient we had at my old hospital right at the beginning of the pandemic where she lost her dad and actually performed CPR on him.
Oh, gosh.
And he passed. She was pregnant.
What?
And so she had his frame in the room with his picture. And, like, she just kept saying, like, he should be here. They were the best friends.
Oh.
And so, like, even, like, that layered on there.
Yeah.
Like, that. So this stuff you guys can't control. We can't control this.
Right. But what are the components that we can control?
Yeah.
And what of this maybe came from us? Because, I mean, I would bet money that many of you listening are like, yeah, I helped her avoid a C-section.
Right.
Like, I did that ish. Like, I'm going to give them all the credit. And that's always what we say. Like, they did it. Their body did it. But, like, we help a lot. And we advocate a lot. And you asked for that extra hour and tried that new technique you learned in our physiologic birth class, which we have a couple more this year coming up. And so, you know, it's like, oh, well, I did that. Are we trying that hard? I don't know. Justine, I feel like you could probably speak to that more than I can.
Well, I kind of just already said, like, I try to get out of that room quick. So, but I think it's definitely different now. I think height of pandemic, when we're in all of the gear and just like, you know, 1,095,000 on our face, total exaggeration. It's different now with COVID. I think that we have become more lax, which I mean,
And
even what the
comfortable.
CDC's just came out with a bunch of new recommendations that
Right.
are very much more relaxed. So, but in the height, we weren't in the room as much.
Right.
We were fearful. We didn't want to go in.
Totally.
You know, all the whole, like, you don't want to push for too long because of the aerosol. Like,
Right.
there was a lot of things
True.
that were struggles there. And then these poor patients pushing in N95 masks.
Right.
Like, all of that. Like,
It's
so,
hard. You know, when you say that, I'm like, I feel like maybe we just need to, like, well, what's done is done.
right.
And kind of like, we did the best we could through a really hard time. And this is not really anything against nursing. I think we can learn from the past. And I think we can say, okay, what do we know? If you haven't taken our physiologic birth class, that's a baseline.
Yep.
You need to do that for your own profession. The expectation is you're the expert at labor. And so you need to know the physiology of labor really well. So that's number one. Take that into your control. Number two would be that, like, we want to do our best, and that's sort of what we preach here. But past that, like, these are really hard circumstances. And the result is, and now we have the proof that, like, it maybe did equal worse quote unquote outcomes. I don't know about mortality, morbidity. That's a whole nother conversation. But, you know, if we're looking at the risk of a cesarean versus a risk of a vaginal birth, the whole goal is decreasing morbidity and mortality through decreasing C-section rates. And so, of course. And then it's you do the best you can till you know better. And once you know better, you do better. Thank you, Maya Angelou, for that, you know? And so now we're looking at the data and we go, okay, so instead of saying, and this is where I've heard a lot of times, and it sort of like gives me a little like knot in my stomach of like, well, yeah, the visitation policies, they actually helped. Maybe they didn't. And maybe even though
visitation policies.
like you
I'm
want
on
the whole
opposite
world in
side.
the room.
I love the whole world in the room.
Oh, I don't. I
love
don't want the
them.
mother-in-law in the room. I hope
want
my
them
doula
all.
clients aren't listening to this, but if I'm going to be honest, like, they are always challenging, you know?
Yeah, it's funny. It's funny how we differ on that. Like, I want everyone in because I just feel like if they wanted them in, they wanted them in.
I mean, I definitely see that, and I support my clients in that. But if I'm looking at it from, like, an ease perspective for the whole thing, like, the more cooks in the kitchen, like, and not everybody is introspective enough, and they have so many opinions, and then it's particularly the mom of the patient always is like, oh, well, my birth, this. And I'm like, it's not your birth. We're not in your birth. It's a different land we're talking about, lady. Like, so, full disclaimer there that I definitely have an opinion about that. But, you know, I think I've heard that of like, well, these visitation policies, like, they're